Good afternoon. It is my honour as Sussex Police Head of Engagement and the Jewish Faith and Equality Lead to be invited to come back this year to take part in this Memorial Day. International Holocaust Memorial Day marks the anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz. The scale of the Holocaust feels unimaginable, as we've seen in those films earlier on. I think that tries to link us back into that point. The fact there are Holocaust survivors still living to bear testament brings a reality to this time in history where hatred caused killing on an industrial scale never previously seen. This darkest time in humanity was shown how hatred can grow and be weaponized, and that we have a duty to ensure the lessons of the Holocaust are not forgotten. Holocaust Memorial Day provides a moment of reflection. 2025 saw attacks on Jewish communities in Manchester, at Yom Kippur outside Heaton Park Synagogue, and on Bondi Beach in Australia at the Hanukkah celebration, or what should have been a celebration. Highlighting that hatred and anti-Semitism remains, and the importance and responsibility of remembrance doesn't end with survivors, and that we all have a duty to bridge generations, and that the bridge between memory, action, history, and hope. Before I light the candle, please can we be silent for 1 minute, just for a moment of reflection and remembrance.
Friends, good afternoon. I'm Alex Mawes from the Association of Jewish Refugees. We are a charity that supports Britain's Holocaust refugees and survivors, and we are very proud to be supporting this event and have done for the past 25 years. It's so great to see so many of you coming out today for this annual, very special commemorative event. I suppose there's a question to be asked, which is why, after 25 years, do we continue to do this year after year? Why, after 81 years after the end of the Holocaust, do we continue to remember? Why is it important to? And I would say that we have to remember that in the modern world, in the heart of Western civilization, across an entire continent, neighbors were complicit in the murder of their own neighbors. And the victims of these murders weren't just chosen at random. They were chosen because they were Jewish. And anti-Semitism, a web of conspiracy myths, anti-Jewish racism, was so ingrained in their thinking that it seemed like a perfectly logical so-called solution to the, quote, problem of Jewish people's very existence to murder them. And meanwhile, across the entire world, nation after nation closed its doors to Jews when they were at their most desperate for sanctuary and when there was still a chance for them to be saved. That's why we continue to remember the Holocaust. And as we just heard a moment ago, that anti-Semitism has not disappeared. It still exists in our world today. And so it is, unfortunately, an evergreen subject. We still live very much in living memory of the Holocaust. And now when I use that term, living memory, there's another important thing that suggests, that there are still people in our community, our neighbors, our fellow members of our communities who are eyewitnesses, who have memories that they can share. We are so fortunate because we're really the last generation, those of us in this room today, who will have an opportunity to learn, to hear firsthand from an eyewitness to the Holocaust, someone who has a personal experience to share. And that's what brings me coming back to this event year after year myself, the opportunity to hear these firsthand accounts, because what the Nazis sought to do was to dehumanize Jewish people. And so what we aim to do in the field of Holocaust education and remembrance is to rehumanize, to hear the human stories behind that historical episode. And so it gives me great pleasure to welcome today's survivor speaker. It's such a privilege. Please join me in welcoming Malka Levine.
Hello, Sussex. How lovely to see you all. You have a wonderful place. I'm so impressed. What an iconic place. Now, my name is Malka Levine. I'm a Holocaust survivor. In actual fact, I'm the Holocaust survivor that it's being called now the bullet Holocaust. We are the people that came from Ukraine. We are the bullet Holocaust because we had no chance to go to a concentration camp and to go and work and try and pray to live another day. Where I come, Ukraine, we were shot on the spot. We didn't even have the chance to live for another day. We weren't even worth the ink to be tattooed and be a number. Some historians say that the largest percentage, it's a horrible thing to say percentage really when it comes to people, the largest percentage that perished in the Holocaust were people that came from Ukraine. Now, I come from a place called Volodymyr-Volynski, but in actual fact, it was renowned by its Jewish name called Ludmir. It was a very Jewish town. In actual fact, it is situated in the northwest of Ukraine, a border town with Poland. Now, up to 1939, we lived under the Polish regime. In actual fact, we were quite happy to get rid of them because they were so anti-Semitic. In 1939, as probably a lot of you know, that it was signed a pact between Hitler and Stalin. It is a famous act called the Ribbentrop-Molotov Pact. What it consisted of, that pact, it was a pact for 10 years. If Hitler would decide to occupy a foreign country, Stalin wouldn't interfere. And if Stalin would like to occupy another country, if Russia would like to occupy another country, Hitler wouldn't interfere. It's reminiscing exactly what is happening now. Russia is trying to come into Ukraine. When this pact was signed, we became part of Stalin's Shangri-La in 1939. In actual fact, it sounds that it might have been worse than being under the Polish government, but in actual fact, things in the beginning didn't change an awful lot, so life just carried on. Now, Volodymyr-Volynski, or Ludmir, as it was renowned, it was a town of 40,000 people. But what is interesting, the majority of the people were actually Jewish. 25,000 were Jewish people, 15,000 were Poles, because it was a border town, and the minority, although it was a Ukrainian town, the Ukrainians were a minority because they lived in the villages, in the surrounding area, and they lived off the land. Now, up to 1941, we lived under Russian occupation. Now, Hitler, a man of his word, because that pact, the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, had to carry on for 10 years. Hitler decided he had enough. 18 months into the pact, he declared Barbarossa. Barbarossa was the time that Hitler went for Stalin's throat in 1941, in June 1949. At the moment Barbarossa started, a lot of Germans came in, all the Nazis came into our town, because at that time they were already in Poland. When they first came into our town in June 1941, the cult wasn't in full throttle, because first of all they annihilated the ruling classes, and sort of from time to time they took out a few Jewish people and annihilated and so on. But we Jewish people in Volodymyr-Volynski, we were living in fool's paradise, because we thought, as we are under Stalin's regime, the Germans wouldn't occupy. So a lot of people didn't prepare shelters. But some people did see the calamity, and they did build shelters. I come from a family, I had two brothers, myself, my mother and my father. My father was a great optimist. He didn't think that it was worthwhile building a shelter, because the situation will change, and he couldn't just get to terms that the Germans, such intelligent people, such educated people, would descend so low and kill Jewish people. Why? Well, it was a big mistake. We didn't have a shelter. Some people did. But as I said, when the Germans, when they first came into our town, there wasn't mass murder, because they were waiting for the Wannsee Conference. It's a very important time for you students to remember. In January 1942, Himmler, the architect of the Holocaust, and Heydrich, they convened a conference in Wannsee. Wannsee is a place just outside Berlin. There they were going to have the Wannsee rules, in actual fact, how they were going to annihilate a nation, the Jewish people. And they had exactly the rules, how they were going to bring it to fruition. When the rules from Wannsee came out, they rang out the rules from Wannsee in January 1942, we, the Jewish people, 25,000 people, we were ordered to leave our homes. All methods of communications were taken away. We corralled into a ghetto. We had to leave our home. And when we came into the ghetto, we were allocated a little hovel that stood on stilts. That was the ground, and the stilts were there. And there was a space between the floor and the ground. It was Friday lunchtime in the ghetto. We all sat down to have a meal. My paternal grandmother, Miriam, my two brothers, my dad and my mother, we were having a meal, and my mother happened to look through the window, and suddenly she sort of came out with this huge screech, "Children, we're on fire." We didn't understand, and we looked. What do you mean? And we are under fire. The Gestapo, the SS, Polish police, Ukrainian police. The Ukrainian collaborated with the Germans because they wanted their country to be free of Russians, a bit like now what's happening. So they came into town, into the ghetto, and just machine gunned people. And then they came in with a van, and they were escorting people, just gathered people, taking them into a place called Pietidin. Pietidin was about 6 or 7 miles away from town. Jewish people were taken out from the ghetto, digging out huge trenches, 3 enormous trenches. And Goering from the Luftwaffe, he said that those trenches were meant to be for German Messerschmitts, to store German Messerschmitts. And we idiots, we believed. We were so gullible. So when they came into the ghetto, I was 3 years old. My older brother, which was 7 years older than me, 10, and my middle brother, 8. And the Germans, when they came into the ghetto, they were starting to shoot. And the people were collected, put them into a van that took them to this place called Pietidin. Now, a lot of people that were savvy and could read the situation as it was hid. They had shelters. But my dad, we didn't have a shelter. But my mother was a very quick thinker. So what she said, because there was a trap door between the floor of our hovel and there was a space underneath. So she opened up that trapdoor, she chucked in a loaf of bread, a bottle of water, and some honey. And we all lowered ourselves and we went down below the floor, and we were lying down there. But the thing is really, I don't know how we weren't noticed because it was open there and people could have seen, but for some reason they didn't see it. Anyway, the people were taken to Pietidin. There were Goering's Messerschmitts were supposed to be. And all the people, the old, the young, the in-between, and babies that even haven't had a name yet, they were ordered to lie down in those trenches. There was sitting a German SS guy. He was sitting on a plush chair. To his left, he had a table laden with chocolate. To his right, he had a table laden with champagne. He was stripped to his waist with a huge belt with bullets. In his hand, he had a machine gun, and he just mowed down people. Can you imagine? Just mowed down. We were lying there under the floor, and we could see the Germans, we could see the hem of their coats walking and searching out to try and find some Jewish people, and they were walking with huge Alsatians. How these Alsatians never sniffed us out. Till this very day, I can't believe it. The only explanation I can come up with, as animals had more compassion for mankind than man himself. Lying there for about 3 days under the stilts, between the stilts. On the third day was a bit of a lull. We couldn't hear so much shooting and shattering of glass and furniture and screams and so on. It was a bit quiet, and we didn't have anything to eat or to drink. So my dad said to my mother, you know what, I better go up while it's quiet, and I'll try and throw in something. Well, my dad went up. He threw in a loaf of bread and some water or whatever he could lay his hands on. And he had a conversation with my mother. And my mother asked him, what is happening? And he told them what is happening. And while this conversation was going on, suddenly we could hear some steps nearing. And as my dad heard the steps nearing, maybe there was still time for him to lower himself, but he thought just in case if somebody saw him, he shut quickly that door, and he said, and his last words on planet Earth were to my mother, save the children. And that was through the whole time it went with my mother, save the children, save the children. And with just one shut of that door, we 3 children became orphans. My mother a widow, my grandmother has lost her son, and I never had an opportunity again to call her dad. I was 3 years old. And we were lying there underneath, and we could hear the smashing of the furniture and smashing of glass and people screaming and shouting, people. And I don't know how we were lying there and how we weren't discovered. Well, again, at night used to be a little bit quiet. So when it was quiet at night, my mother had to feed the children. She was very courageous, quick thinker, very courageous. At night, she would crawl out into the fields. In actual fact, some of the fields belonged to our family, to her, because she had a lot of fields there. My mother came from a farming family, so she knew very much about crops. And she would crawl out. And then, when she came back, she would bring a potato, a beet, a tomato, and because it was dark, she couldn't see if the tomatoes were ripe. So we were fed green tomatoes. So to this very day, guys, I prefer green tomatoes to red tomatoes. I developed the taste for green tomatoes. These tomatoes were so dangerous, and it was, I don't know how she survived to come back, but she did. After 15 days, which the German coined Aktion, which action or pogrom, or whichever way you want to call it, my mother said, it's time to call out. Maybe the Germans, the thirst for Jewish blood was quenched. When we called out from beneath, where we were hiding beneath the floor, all we could see was a sea of people lying there with their eyes to the heavens. Why? They're still waiting. Why? Why? As we came out from the first ghetto, we got to know, in this action of 15 days, They killed 15,000 people, guys. It's a huge number. People can't comprehend it. 15,000 people in 15 days. And when we came out from the first ghetto, we were allocated a little hovel in the second ghetto. And the second ghetto was very close to the river, because there was a river that was flowing through our town. That little hovel had a little window. My mother had to go to work because Dad wasn't with us any longer, so he couldn't go. He couldn't bring any products for us and so on. But Mum was forced to go to work. She went to work to clean the barracks, the German barracks. She worked in the fields, which in a way it was a blessing, because she could pick up a little cabbage or something. She could bring it back and she would put it in her bosom. And her bosoms were, Dolly Parton, eat your heart out. And she would come back, and we three, my two brothers and myself, we would look through the window and wait for Mom. One day, the three of us were looking through the window, and my big brother said, "Hey, Malka, look, there is a girl sledging in your sledge." She was obviously not a Jewish girl, and life was carrying on. For the Gentiles, was carrying on. And I looked and I said, "Yeah, that is my sledge," because it had a special car or whatever. I recognized it. I didn't like that girl. I still don't. And as we were sitting there and waiting, as we were very close to the river, my dad had boats. So the German officers, they were sitting in my dad's boats and singing a song. You'll have to excuse me, you German-talking people. But the song was, "Wenn das jüdische Blut spritzt von dem Messer, lachen wir sich und wir freuen sich. When the Jewish blood will come gushing out from the knife, we will laugh and rejoice." And I, as a child, still remember that song. I wish there were better songs. In that second ghetto, we were there for a few months, and suddenly, in the middle of the night, we never took off our clothes or our shoes. We always slept in case we had to flee, which we did. Suddenly, we heard, again, the Gestapo that says that the Ukrainian police, the Polish police, burst into the ghetto and starting to collect Jewish people, and they were putting them on a van, and they were taking them to the prison yard. They took us to the prison yard. It was a terrible winter. It was December. We were frozen. We were hungry. We were frightened. And what they did, they were making columns of 11 people per column. And they would organize 3 columns, 33 people, and they would take them in a van to Pietidin, which we know what was going to happen there. Because that van could only accommodate 33 people. My grandmother was standing, I was standing next to grandmother, holding her hand. And a German guard came. He divided between me and my grandmother. My grandmother was number 33. I was number 34. She was the last one to be pushed into that van, and she was driven off. We were waiting for the next column. But as we were waiting for the next column, we suddenly saw my father's brother, Uncle Hirsch, was still alive. He was working in some factory, and he got quite friendly with the high officer, a German officer. He wasn't Gestapo or SS, he was a Wehrmacht officer, the regular army high officer, and he was quite friendly with Hirsch. And Hirsch told them that his family is going to be taken to Pitilin. So they rushed in, and they were going to take us out to try and fight and live another day. But the guards wouldn't let them. There was a huge conversation, huge arguments. And the guard said to the German officer, look, you know very well that Hitler said any German or any Gentile family that is going to save a Jewish life is going to be court-martialed, and you're putting your head on the block for them. But he said, I know exactly what I'm doing, and he said, I'm taking them out. And he took us out, and he went, and they took us back to the third ghetto. In the third ghetto, there were only a few hundred people that survived out of 25,500, or maybe a little more. 10,000 people were taken out from the prison yard to Pitilin and mowered down. Then, obviously, it was coming up to the end of 1943, December 1943. In the ghetto, the third ghetto, there was the German that was in charge of the ghetto. His name was Keller. And Keller had a huge Alsatian dog, and he called the dog Stalin. Suddenly, we saw that Keller shot the dog. We couldn't find out, he was so together with that dog. But what happened? At that time, Hitler lost Stalingrad. And Stalingrad was the change of the tide of Second World War. It's most important for any historian, well, all historians know that was the change, really, of the tide of the Second World War, Stalingrad. Now, my mother, she was a very quick thinker. She thought that it was already that Hitler was on the back foot. The Red Army, it wouldn't take them too long now because Stalingrad was in their hands and the Germans were losing the war. It won't take too long for the Red Army to come back into our town. We were almost touching the rainbow, but not quite. So she thought she'll make contact with a guy called Rivka. Rivka was a Ukrainian freedom fighter. He wanted Ukraine for Ukrainians. Quite right, what's happening now? He was the ace in the pack. My mother heard about him through my dad because he used to come to my dad's business. So she made contact with Rivka. That was her last throw of the dice, really. How's she going to save the children? she said to Rivka, now look, Rivka, it looks that the Germans are losing the war, and all the Ukrainian freedom fighters that fought with the Germans, that collaborated with the Germans against the Russians, are going to be hung on the highest pole, and you will be the first one. I know you have a family in Biskovic. It was a village about 10 miles away from our town. Your uncle, he's a farmer in Biskovic. If you can make contact with him, if he would come, and for his house to be a safe house, it won't be too long now for the Russians to come in, and maybe they'll give us a home. Well, Rivka, he could see the rationale. He went to his uncle, to Mr. Yakimchuk and Mrs. Yakimchuk, and he told the Yakimchuks the story. And he said, you know, it's a husband and wife. He didn't mention children because he didn't want to torpedo the big idea. And he said to Biskovic, you know, to Yakimchuk, you know, it won't take too long now, and it was only for months or two because the Russians will soon be here. And he told them also what is happening, you know, that would save his life. And that husband and wife, they'll work very hard, they'll make you rich. And it's worthwhile you doing it. Anyway, he sold the idea to the Yakimchuks. And the poor Yakimchuks bought the idea. We came to Rivka's house. We left the ghetto. We escaped the ghetto. We went to Rivka's house. We went under the wires. My mother knew exactly how, because the town was, she knew it, like the back of her hand. We went to Rivka. Mr. and Mrs. Yakimchuk arrived in the wagon, in the half-lame horse. They came to see this couple that was going to make them rich. They came into the house and they said, where's this couple that's going to make me rich? So Rivka said, well, it's not quite so. You are going to take this woman and the 3 children. And he said, are you mad? Are you mad? In my house, to fill a family with children? I mean, if anybody would see them, the whole village is finished. He said, yet, he wasn't going to take them. And then my mother spoke to Mr. Yakimchuk and told him, and he still said, no. It's very dangerous, and he can't take it on his shoulder because he's going to endanger the whole village. The whole village will go if anybody would see us, if somebody would see us. He wouldn't. Then Mr. Yakimchuk had a son called Ivan, and Ivan too was collaborating with the Germans against the Russians. So Rivka said to him, it's not just my life, but this woman is going to, when the Russians will come, she will go to court and she will say, how come that we collaborated with the Germans as we saved the Jewish family? What a fantastic alibi. But he said, you know, you're endangering your son, said the old man. And he still said, it's very difficult. As much as I would like them to come, I can't. I can't endanger the whole village. Then came in Mrs. Yakimchuk. She was a fantastic lady. She was a devout Christian. Every time she saw us, she would go on her knees and she would cross herself. She said to, now listen, Yakimchuk, if you're not going to take them, you can stay wherever you want. They are coming home with me. Well, poor Mr. Yakimchuk. How do you stand up to a woman? And my mother, eventually, after a lot of kerfuffle, a lot of persuasion, we were packed into the cart. We were covered in bales of straw, and that was in the middle of the night, and we came to Biskupich, to the big metropolis of Biskupich. We came in to the Yakimchuk's house. We went into the kitchen. I mean, if there is a place on earth, on that moment, that one can say heaven, that was heaven. It was warm, and the smell of baking bread. Can you imagine? What a moment. We were meant to be in the house. We were there for 3 days in the house. We would sit, when we were having a meal, when Mrs. Yakimchuk would produce a pièce de résistance, we would sit on the floor. She would produce a basin with some soup in the center, and we all would help ourselves, and so on. The third day, when we're sitting and enjoying Mrs. Yakimchuk's soup, suddenly there was a knock on the door. And it was quite a fierce knock, it wasn't a very friendly one. So we couldn't believe it. Our hearts dropped. And Mr. Yakimchuk made a sign to Ivan, to his son, to take us out through the back door into the barn. We all four went into the barn. It was freezing cold with icicles and snow, and we were sitting on the ground and waiting what is happening. And it was going on for a few hours. So my mother said, it's probably the family that came, and they're having a good time with them. So that's why it takes a long time. Eventually, Mr. Yakimchuk came after a long wait. And he said, I'm awfully sorry. I would love to have you and save you. But unfortunately, the people that came, they were the Gestapo. They were going to establish a hub in Mr. Yakimchuk's house to train young Ukrainian to work with the Germans, because Hitler was losing so many soldiers. They recruited children. Our hearts sank, and he said, as much as I would like to help, but how can I? Would you like to live together, next to the Germans? The following minute, everybody would go and everybody in the village would disappear. And we were sitting, and he said, you must go. So my mother said to Mr. Yakimchuk, where am I going? At the moment we come out from here, we're dead. And it was a long conversation with Yakimchuk. And as my mother was trying to pacify Mr. Yakimchuk, which was quite difficult, Mrs. Yakimchuk came. She came from church. She just had a chat with the vicar. Nobody in the village knew that they were harboring Jewish people. But Mrs. Yakimchuk, because she was a devout Christian, so she went to confessions. So she had to tell the vicar that the Yakimchuk harboring Jews. The only person in the whole area that knew that they are having Jewish people was the vicar. And he kept his word. Mrs. Yakimchuk came. And she said, what's all this kerfuffle happening here? So he said to his wife, now listen, as much as I want them to stay here, this is going to be a hub for training youngsters to work with the Germans. So they must go. So she said, what do you mean? Where's she going to go with the 3 children? So she said, well, have you got an idea? He said to her. So she said, yes, I have an idea. She said, can you see, there's Ivan, the son. He was just coming with a long face and a huge shovel. And he was going to dig out a pit right here. And they will lower themselves into that pit. And I will look after them. And if they discovered, I would say you didn't have the knowledge that they were there. It was my responsibility. And if they were found, I'll go with them. What a woman. Well, we lowered ourselves into that pit. It's a long story. It's all in the book. I'm not trying to sell you the book, don't worry. 9 months we were in that pit. And all what was going on there. And there's a lot of material that was. This really is the core of the story. After 9 long months, it was very difficult. When the Germans were winning a battle or two, Mr. Yakimchuk was on top of the world. He thought, oh, how I'm so happy stay here. But if the Russians were losing a battle or two, he told us, sorry, you have to go. The Russians will never come. And my mother said to him, yeah, they will come. My mother, she said, you know the Russians, if they were walking on stilts, they should have been here by now. It's her sense of humor that really kept us going. And we were there for 9 long months. Winter went, the summer came. August 1944. As we were dwelling in our country mansion, we suddenly heard, Za Rodina, za Stalina, hurrah! For Stalin, for our nation, for Mother Russia, hurrah! We looked at each other. We were liberated in August 1944. The war was still going on till May 1945. But we were a border town, so the Russians were going through the place where we lived. They were going to fight in Berlin. And our town was liberated. Well, the Yakimchuk came, and they said, we have been liberated. After 9 long months, we crawled out from the pit. We were quite sorry to say goodbye to the pit. It hugged us for 9 long months. I thought that's how most people live. I didn't know any different because for 3 years I was in a ghetto and then in a pit. I didn't know that I thought this is normal for people to live in. We called out. Mr. Yakimchuk refused to take us back in his stretched limo, in his lame horse and his cart, because he didn't want that the villagers would know how endangered the village. So we had to walk back for miles back to our town. Well, it took a long time because we could hardly walk, obviously. We came out. And what we came out was with a plan. The only thing we could hold on is a plan for Mr. Yakimchuk, how we should follow the road back to Volodymyr-Volynski, and a few loaves of bread for Mrs. Yakimchuk. They were lovely, those bread. And we people, hardly a shoe to our feet, barely a cloth to our body. We walked back to our grieving town, Ludmir. We came back to our town. There was no home. We were a family of 74 people. 4 people survived out of the whole family. We were looking for other Jewish people. Could hardly find. Eventually, we found out of 25,000 Jews. 25,000 Jews. It's a huge number. One can't comprehend that. 30 people, 30 people survived, 9 children. And I am one of the 9 children that telling you my story today. Thank you.
Thank you for this amazing presentation and sharing us with us this really special story, because we don't have a lot of stories where a family, first of all, almost a whole family with 3 children survived, and then also how the story that you told about the surroundings, about your interaction with the local population, and all the dilemmas that actually emerged through that. But without further ado, I would like to open the floor for questions, and please keep your questions as short as possible, because we want to give as much people as possible the opportunity to speak. And again, there's a priority for kind of the younger. I see over there's already a hand.
I just want to know how you feel about the spread of anti-Semitism all over the world today.
It's tough. It is tough. There's no doubt about it. There's a lot of irony in war. War doesn't make sense. Hate, what's the point? I'll give you one example. Hitler there was an attempt to assassinate Hitler by Klaus von Stauffenberg. Hitler was sitting next to a table, a very robust table, oak table, and a bomb went off. And he was quite badly, in fact, very badly wounded, Hitler and some of his junta. He survived the assassination attempt, but he suffered with a lot of wounds that wouldn't heal. Now, he was healed thanks to a capsule of penicillin that was found on an American prisoner of war. So he survived thanks to penicillin. Now, penicillin was discovered right here in England, in Oxford, by a German Jewish scientist by the name of Ernst Chain. Ernst Chain fled his hometown in Germany. He came to England because Hitler was going to annihilate him. But yet, he, Chain, thanks to his discovery, he saved Hitler's life. And Hitler was saved by a robust oak table. What a shame it wasn't a flat back from IKEA, if only.
Okay.
Hello, I'd just like to ask something. How does it feel being one of the few people who are still alive to tell the tale at first person about the Holocaust?
I went through a lot in life. I lived in different countries, different cultures, but I never sit down actually, and I'd sort of think about it, and I don't feel people should have pity for me. On the contrary, maybe once people would listen to my story, maybe they change their mind about being an anti-Semite. And the other thing is, I have a son and a daughter, Elaine and Avi. I never sort of felt like I really should tell them all the horrors that I went through. I want them to be normal people. And I too wanted to be a normal people, like you, and you. So I don't say consciously, so sit down, oh, I'm a survivor. I'm just like everybody else that had the misfortune to go through a difficult time. But we have to remember, history repeats itself, and we really have to think about it and not hate, and think for yourself. Don't go with the many, because the many are not always right. Just think for yourself. And that's my message to you, actually. Yeah.
What kind of kept you going, like in the pit for 9 months? How did you pass the time?
It's in the book.
Did you ever get an opportunity to reconnect with Mrs. Yakimchuk and thank her?
To visit? Well, when we left Ukraine, we left the Yakimchuks economically quite well off, because my mother didn't, my mother was a merchant, and my grandfather was a merchant, because Ukraine is a very rich country. It was the breadbasket of the world. The land there is so rich. In actual fact, when the Germans first came in to our part of the world, they scooped up the earth, they loaded it on wagons, and took it back to Germany. It's reminiscing a little bit like what's happening now, what Trump is trying to do. He's selling Ukraine some ammunition, and he wants to take the earth back to America. Nothing changes. So my mother, she was very savvy. And business was in her DNA, really. I always say that I'm quite sure that Shakespeare probably built his story about Shylock, the Merchant of Venice. It must be some distant relative of ours. I always said it to my mother. And after the war, she made quite a lot of money, but it's in the book. And when she left, she left the Yakimchuks in a much better state economically than they were. In actual fact, it wasn't only leaving them in a better economic situation, but she also paid a doctor to save his daughter who was very ill. That was the most important thing in actual time. And we left, sorry, what did you say? We left Ukraine, but we never saw them again. My mother, because it was dangerous for them. Not for us, because we were coming to the West. And they were there under Russian occupation. So it was quite dangerous for them to have contact with the West. So it was dangerous for them. So we had no contact. But when the Berlin Wall came down and Gorbachev was in charge of Russia, and things were far more normal between the West and the East, I studied Russian. And my first mission in my life was to go and see the Yakimchuk and say to them, thank you. And I wanted to speak to them directly in Russian, not through interpreter. I want for them to see how thankful and how courageous they were to save our lives. So I did see them, and it's in the pictures in the book. The only thing is I didn't manage to go to the hairdresser. May I just say something else? I went twice to see them, and once I went to Krakow, and I met up with Yakimchuk. They were dead, obviously, but the children, Stefan and the daughter, and I took her to Auschwitz. Now, the only other thing I want to say here, what happened in Auschwitz is, one can't understand it, absolutely not. But at least they had a chance to work and maybe to fight and live another day. We didn't have that chance. But the thing is, when there is a Holocaust Memorial Day, I would like very much to incorporate it with the bullet Holocaust, because in actual fact, there where the majority of the Jewish people perished. Some historians say that it's 50%, 3 million. You know, it's very difficult to count it all, but a lot of it. Ukraine is the largest graveyard for Jewish people, because we weren't burned, we were just buried.
Please.
Hi, Malka. My name is Adam. I'm here with the Jewish Society of Brighton and Sussex. I just wanted to say, thank you for telling us your story. And it's very, very inspiring for us and for everyone in this room. My question is, what's your message for the younger Jewish generation today?
My message?
Yeah.
For the younger people? Now, guys, we are leaving, people of my age, we're leaving a planet. Planet Earth is sizzling. We are leaving you a terrible, terrible planet. You are educated people. You are the future. You will have to come up how to solve our planet. You know, the Second World War was the bloodiest wars ever happened. But it has happened in the 20th century. But the 20th century, although so many thousands, and I mean million and million people went in the Second World War. Now, in the 20th century, it is the bloodiest of centuries. We had huge wars. We had countries re-emerged. Some countries went. But the human spirit always triumphs. Always triumphs. We went to the moon. We cracked the secret of life, DNA. America, the new world, rocked the old world. A lot, what have they given to us? They rocked us, the old world. We had Hershey bars, we had chewing gum, we had Coca-Cola, we rocked till we dropped. But we're still here. Against all the odds, we are still here. And our future is in your hands, youngsters. You are so lucky to have the opportunity to come to such an iconic place like the University of Sussex. I still can't believe it that I'm sitting here with you people in that wonderful, inspiring space. Now, the world is your oyster, and you are the pearls. Thank you.
Okay, so before we close the event, I would also like to take this opportunity to thank all of those who help us to organize such an event. These events don't happen out of the blue. I would especially like to thank Stevie Starr and Diana Franklin for making all this happen every year. All the speakers from the previous session, and again, Malka, and the university for supporting this event for so many years. I think it's not so self-evident, especially in these days. And thank all of you for coming and for your questions, for your interest, and I hope to welcome you all next year in our next year event, which probably will happen in February 2027 already. How time flies. So thank you so much.